bunch of spellcasters all gathering together to empower a ritual or cast some exceptionally strong spell is such a common trope in the fantasy genre and even D&D, despite the fact that there is no real mechanical basis for it in 5th edition. Well, it turns out that all of that is changing next month when the new Forgotten Realms Heroes of Faerun book comes out. Yesterday on D&D Beyond, an article was posted discussing a new spellcasting mechanic that is coming to D&D, and I thought it was actually super cool, and I haven't seen a ton of discussion about it either. Someone did share with me on my Discord server, and I had totally missed it. So, in case you did too, I thought it'd be fun to go over it. I will state that no, I do not have an advanced copy of the book or anything like that. Everything I'm going to talk about is available in the blog post. I will try and fill in whatever gaps I can, since the article wasn't exhaustive, and maybe do some speculation about what spells might be best to utilize this mechanic with. So without too much else, let's talk about circle casting, the new mechanic that's coming to Dungeons & Dragons. Before we do though, I'm like 50 subs away from hitting 20,000, which is legitimately insane. So if you'd like to help me get over that hurdle and feel like I've earned your subscription, subscribing to the channel and clicking the like button while you're there helps so much more than you probably realize. Thanks. So what exactly is circle casting? Essentially, it's probably what you think it is. It's a way to have multiple spellcasters come together to channel their magic in an effort to amplify or empower a spell in various ways. Every spell in the game, provided it has a casting time of 1 action or 1 minute or longer, is eligible to be circle cast. This basically means that the vast majority of spells in the game can utilize this new mechanic. The only exceptions are bonus action spells like Misty Step or reaction spells like Counterspell, and the spell needs to be cast using a spell slot. Other than that though, anything you want can be circle cast. When you opt to circle cast a spell, the group becomes divided in two. The primary caster, who is the person that is actually casting the spell, and then the secondary casters. The primary caster chooses the targets for the spell, maintains concentration if it's required, provides any material components, and expends the spell slot and makes any other choices that the spell may require, such as a damage type. The secondary casters, on the other hand, must take the magic action and be near the caster to contribute to the spell. And if the casting time is longer than 1 minute, they need to take the magic action on each of their turns and maintain concentration along with the primary caster. Now, this is where it does get a bit confusing since we don't have full information about how this works, we just get some vague descriptions. Like, how close does a secondary caster need to be? It just says near. More importantly though, how are 1-action spells handled? A 1-action spell occurs on the same turn that it is cast. If I'm hucking a fireball, it happens immediately. How does a secondary caster use their magic action when it's not their turn? It's currently unclear how exactly this is going to be handled, though obviously the book will provide a lot more details, but since we don't have that right now, I'm going to have to guess. I see 2 ways that it could be handled. First, they could do something similar to the ready action, but in reverse. You take your reaction to begin participating in the spell, and then you are essentially forced to burn your action to use the magic action when it comes around to your turn. Or, and very similarly, they don't require you to burn your reaction. The spell casting is basically just extended for the round until all players are done contributing to the circle cast, have used their magic action to do so. And then when it gets back to the primary caster, the spell then goes off. If I had to guess, I think they will use the second option, which is essentially just to delay the casting until all secondary casters have contributed. I don't think that they're going to make anyone burn a reaction to do this, but who knows? The effects are potentially very powerful, so I wouldn't be too surprised if they did that either. Let me know how you think it's going to work in the comments or if you have any other ideas. So, speaking of powerful effects, the question then arises, what is the point of circle casting? What am I getting from it? Well, honestly, they're kind of insane. Again, some of these are lacking details, so we are going to need to fill in the blanks, but let's look at them all. First is Augment. This lets us stretch the range of our spells by thousands of feet, in quotes. That's ludicrous. Again, we don't know exactly what this means since thousands of feet is pretty ambiguous, but based on some of the other new sample spells that they provide that we'll get to later, I guess this would mean that it could be potentially up to a mile. What's cool about this is that it also provides incredible potency for combat spells to now be used as siege weapons. Even in the blog post itself, they talk about the big bad and their cultists empowering a meteor swarm and having it be much larger, which is another effect. But even just increasing the distance can be such an incredibly powerful big bad weapon to slam down fireballs or meteor swarms or cloud kills or something like that. This one probably serves less of a purpose in combat, but I could still find some use if the battlefield was exceptionally large or spanned a city or something like that. I wonder if the distance could be increased depending on the number of secondary casters involved, maybe like a number of 1,000 feet equal to the amount of secondary casters. Next is Distribute, which lets us spread the concentration requirement among our allies. Presumably this just means among the secondary casters. This has some interesting applications in that it makes it so that no one individual caster is susceptible to being damaged and therefore dropping concentration. The flip side is that by my current understanding, all the casters do still need to remain near the primary caster, so any AoE would still threaten a number of concentration checks. The only other thing is that it also does tie up the concentration for each of these secondary casters, which could be potentially bad depending on what they're wanting to cast. I can see this being really good in some niche circumstances. Something like Banishment jumps to mind to help keep the target out of play for longer, or Hypnotic Pattern for the same reasons. But I'm sure there are going to be plenty of others as well. The next one we have is Expand, which allows us to widen the spell's influence and increase its area of effect. We don't get many clues as to how much this actually increases the area of effect by, though. The only thing that points to it is again right at the end where they mention dozens of casters sending an expanded meteor swarm crashing down on Waterdeep. This suggests two things. Firstly, that the area can be quite large given that the standard blast radius for Meteor Swarm is a 40-foot radius sphere. But it also suggests, as I assumed earlier, that perhaps the amount of casters involved does increase the range as well as now the area of effect. This both logically makes sense and is also just so cool. I don't know what the cap would be, but what I really like about this is that it can be useful in combat, out of combat, and as they suggest, be an incredibly powerful tool as the DM to have NPCs use to really ramp up the magnitude of big bad effects and create some smoother interactions for higher level play. Moving on to Prolong, this gives us the ability to sustain the effect of a spell for hours beyond its typical duration. Now for this one, we don't get any direct additional information about it. The only comparison I can draw is to the Sorcerer's Extended Spell Meta Magic option, which allows them for the cost of 1 sorcery point to double the duration of the spell. I have to imagine that this, since the cost is much higher, will be significantly longer, or at least for much longer depending on how many casters are supporting the spell. If we're talking in the realms of hours, something like Aura of Vitality sounds incredible. Honestly, even the new Longstrider spell could be so valuable to have access for the majority of an adventuring day. Next is Safeguard, which allows us to protect our allies from the storm that we unleash. Presumably this is not dissimilar to another meta magic option, this time Careful spell. So if that is our only point of comparison, the question then becomes, how does it get better? Potentially, it would make a number of allies completely immune to the damage instead of taking half on their failed save. This seems plausible. This one also does seem less useful for general purposes, but in the case of unleashing some massive torrent of attacks on a city and wanting to protect the innocent bystanders, this can let you accomplish exactly that. If we were to use it in combat, it just seems a bit odd to have other casters need to sacrifice their entire action to protect some other party members, when those other party members could just potentially move. There's definitely going to be some niche scenarios where it might be the best, even in combat, but it doesn't seem particularly common to me. And finally, we have Supplant, which allows us to replace costly material components with the collective strength of the circle. Presumably, this means that it may reduce the value of some material components required by a certain amount depending on the amount of secondary casters involved in supporting the spell. This, to me, immediately makes me think of resurrection spells. Things like Revivify, Reincarnate, Regeneration, or True Resurrection can become potentially much more accessible depending on how potent this is, and can make for some very cool moments during play. But honestly, even other spells like Hero's Feast or the new Force Cage can be really good uses for it. So I did say that was the last one, but I was kind of lying. Some spells will also have specific effects when they are circle cast. I believe that you can still opt to use any of the other options if you'd prefer. However, these spells have some specific, very potent effects that are sometimes even combinations of the other effects, but also have higher costs that are associated with them. Fortunately, we got to see 2 examples, Doomtide and Spellfire Storm. Unfortunately, it is not the full spell text, but rather just a description of what the spells do, but we're still going to touch on it. First up is Doomtide, which creates a 20-foot radius sphere of inky magical darkness that spreads from our location, requiring concentration. Any creature within it takes 5d6 psychic damage, and if they fail their saving throw against a spell, we don't know what that is, they will subtract 1d6 from all saving throws until the end of their next turn. This means that not only are they more likely to fail saves just on other spells until it gets back to them, but it also increases the likelihood that they will subsequently fail their save against Doomtide again, which is super cool. But that's not where it ends, because it does have another specific bonus for when casting it as a circle spell. If Doomtide is cast with at least 5 secondary casters, you can also expend a string of 3 black pearls from Pandemonium. The spell's range then becomes extended to 1 mile and lasts until it's dispelled, meaning it no longer requires concentration. On top of the requirement to have 5 secondary casters, each of those secondary casters must also expend a spell slot of level 3 or higher. This can be a super powerful effect to lay down before the beginning of a siege or even before beginning combat if you're able to spot a camp that's far off in the distance, for example. Conversely, it can also be used against players in incredibly dangerous ways too. The second spell is Spellfire Storm, which conjures this 20-foot high cylinder with a 20-foot radius, dealing 4d10 radiant damage to those within it, and also interferes with creatures who are attempting to cast spells within the area of it, though it's unclear exactly what that means. And the spell also requires concentration. Additionally, when it is circle cast, you can expend a blue sapphire worth at least 25,000 gold pieces to again extend the range to 1 mile and remove the concentration requirement. Additionally, once again, each of these secondary casters must also expend a spell slot of level 3 or higher. Now, this is pretty difficult to gauge as depending on how good that spell interference effect is, it's going to greatly influence whether or not that 25,000 gold valued sapphire is incredibly expensive or maybe a fair value. It does feel expensive, especially since without any other control effects, it seems simple enough for a caster, especially one that is a full mile away, to just leave the cylinder and then start casting spells. We will need to see the full details on this to truly know how good or bad the added effect is. I will say that it's obvious that they're trying to be careful with these additional components by either making them incredibly specific or incredibly expensive to prevent this kind of thing from just overrunning games, whether from the player side or the DM side, which I think is likely to be a good thing. Obviously, we'll know more once we get the book in our hands. And that's pretty much it. Like I said, we don't have a ton of information to go off of just yet, so there's a lot of speculation here, but I just thought that this was something very much worth talking about. We don't often get to see legitimately new mechanics introduced to the game all that often, so this feels like a big deal. Something I've mentioned a couple times during this video is how I really like that this has the potential to truly ramp up the danger and create brand new and mechanically based threats and plot hooks for a party, especially into the higher levels. But at the same time, when used by players, it gives them new ways to think of and consider spellcasting. Something that I think will annoy people is that this, once again, gives further options and power to spellcasters, therefore increasing that already perceptible divide. By exactly how much is still yet to be known. Will circle casting require a feat or something else? Again, we just don't know yet. I'll definitely be doing a full breakdown of the mechanic once we get the book, and we'll also see a full discussion of the best spells to use for each of the effects. But until then, let me know what you think of circle casting, and take care.